I am working on some pink ribbon accessories. I've created a punch card and I've used it single length and double length. I don't quite like it double length the way it turns out. I'm going to tweak the design. It's actually pretty cute single length, so we'll have both options eventually. But I want my 8-button machine friends to be able to use it. And I've gotten the impression from some of our discussions on the 8-button groups that it is often thought that you have to have special instructions for an 8-button machine. That isn't actually true once you understand the relationship between how the punch card sends the information and how we do it on an 8-button machine. It's really all the same thing behind the scenes. One thing that I needed to know, and because I was designing it, I did know from the outset, is where is the repeat? In this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then 8 more and 8 more to make the 24 across the punch card. Sometimes that isn't true. It would be possible to have a design centered more or less here. And just say we have a butterfly. You need to count and see, have you got 8 stitches or fewer involved in that butterfly? Because if it's more than 8, the challenge is much, much greater. But tons and tons of designs, houndstooth, regular checks, little polka dots, the 1-by-1 pattern that would have one hole punched, 1, 1, 1, 1, all the way across. All of those have fewer than 8 and can be worked as multiples of 2 or 4 or 8, and they can be done just as well on the 8-button machine. So in this case, I knew I wanted to use my 8-button, so I would make my ribbon fit into an 8-stitch wide space, and this is what the card looks like. The red behind it is just so you can see the punched out holes well, nothing more than that. So you can't really use a punch card, but you can look at the punch card, an actual punch card or a design graphed in a magazine for use on a punch card, and you can number your columns of stitches 1 through 8 and see what I did. I just graphed the same exact thing as is punched out here. Now, when it comes time to select for row 1, I'll push buttons 1, 2, and 7, and so on. As I mentioned, this is still a work in progress, and I plan to work on making a lengthened version of the ribbon that doesn't have this bump at the top. In order for you to see everything that's going on, you're not going to be able to see me work the ratchet. You'll just have to believe me when I tell you that I am. Let's take a close look at row 1. I'm really going to knit the background color first. So that means I knit 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8. 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8 using the white yarn. This machine won't carry a spare color along. Instead, I hit both part buttons, ratchet, knit 1 row of background color, ratchet, knit another row of background color. Oops, got a little bit of debris in the act. Now, we want to clear the buttons. Mine are still sticking just a little. I'm in the process of still oiling and cleaning, so I have to make sure they've all come up, and select 1, 2, and 7. Change to color 2. And ratchet. and on to the second row. Something you will notice is that I do have to knit 2 rows of each color using this technique. So this pattern is going to come out double length, even though I told you I didn't care for it on the bulky. But I have already checked it with the standard gauge, and it's okay because everything is so much smaller. It doesn't look funny. That's another thing you might need to do as you design your own patterns, is adjust the things that you're drawing so that it is possible to do them in 2-row increments. In fact, we're moving the carriage 4 times for every row on the chart, but that only makes for 2 complete rows. So we clear this and punch in 2 and 3 and 7. Ratchet, knit, ratchet, knit. This time my ribbon's going to be red, mostly because I don't have any pink yarn handy. But of course there are good uses for a red ribbon too. Background in this case is 1, 2, 7, and 8. So we clear. Put in the white. Ratchet. Knit. I say ratchet, but that's the selection process. You could easily say select knit. Change yarns. I'm on row 3, so I'm going to clear it and select 3, 4, 5, and 6, the ones that have not been used. Select, knit, select, knit. Change yarn. Now for row 4. The background is 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, and 8. And now we just need 4 and 5 in the red. But of course it isn't really only 2 needles that come forward. It's every 4th needle and 5th needle across. Oops, 4 didn't stay depressed. There we go. Every 4th and 5th needle across the entire bed. Well, we have completed this row. Ready to move on to row 5. The background colors are used on 1 and 2, 5, 7, and 8. I found out how to get this yarn properly seated without fancy use of another tool. One hand above, one hand below. The hand below gives a sharp press towards the needle bed and it pops into place. Took me a while to figure that out. So we need 3, 4, and 6. Clear. 3, 4, 6. Next row. We have 3 rows alike coming up, and I'll show you a trick that speeds things up, but you have to keep your wits about you. For the background, we need 1, 4, 5, and 8. This is really 2, 2, 2, and these two will be side by side. So we have the ability to use our moving tool to move the pattern center and not have to reselect for these rows. I'll show you what I mean. We'll select, knit, select, knit. Now, where you probably cannot see, my hand is on the knob that moves the pattern center. If I move it 2 whole places, the alternate pairs of needles should select. And they did. Select, knit, select, knit. We now can go back to the original setting by moving 2 rows. No, 2 needle spaces. Sorry, I misstated that. Select. Now we need to move them again and do the red again. Here comes the 3rd time. Move. This part's easy because we know we should be knitting whites on the same stitches or needles that knitted whites last time, so we can see what comes out, and it's correct. Move 2 spaces and work the red, and we can see that's coming out correctly. Here's the part where you don't want to get confused. We're done going back and forth to knit these 3 rows on the chart, but we must go ahead and move 2 spaces before knitting the next row. Otherwise, the chart will be askew on the knitting. And I will show you where I did that all unawares. I should have thought of it, but I just didn't. And it doesn't come out right. So for this row, the background should be 1 and 2, 7 and 8. And the red should be 3, 4, 5, and 6. One more row to set up. We've just knitted the 2nd row from the top. So we need, for this row, 1, 2, 3, 7 and 8 for the background. 1, 2, 3, 7 and 8 for the background. 1, 2, 3, 7 and 8 for the background. 1, 2, 3, 7 and 8 for the background. 1, 2, 3, 7 and 8 for the background. 1, 2, 3, 7 and 8 for the background. 1, 2, 3, 7 and 8 for the background. 1, 2, 3, 7 and 8 for the background. 1, 2, 3, 7 and 8 for the background. 1, 2, 3, 7 and 8 for the background. 1, 2, 3, 7 and 8 for the background. 1, 2, 3, 7 and 8 for the background. 1, 2, 3, 7 and 8 for the background. 1, 2, 3, 7 and 8 for the background. 1, 2, 3, 7 and 8 for the background. 1, 2, 3, 7 and 8 for the background. 1, 2, 3, 7 and 8 for And we need 4, 5, and 6 for the ribbon. Number 6, you're misbehaving. There we go. Back in there with a little bit of crewel I go when I'm done here. And that is it. Usually you don't want to stop the knitting right when the fair isle is complete. We'll knit a few rows of white and then have a look. Notice I hit plain knitting, so cancel the part buttons, so these needles will knit in their ordinary position. And here is what we just knitted. Now remember when I said that if you don't remember to move the pattern center 2 spaces over at the top of this, you will get a skewed pattern? Here's what I mean. Here's where that happened. The bottom of this was slightly different. I was still tweaking the design, and I realized it was too filled in. It didn't really look like ribbons looping. But this part of it was supposed to be the same, and the little cap on my loops of ribbon got moved into the space where it didn't belong. And that was why. Failing to move the pattern center 2 spaces over here. But I'm quite pleased with this. There is a tweak that you could make without any change to the chart if you want. We could skip row 4. It would get a little complicated. See, this is 4 rows. 2 of them on this row, 2 on this row. But you could knit the background color from right to left. Actually, of course, it's from left to right on the face of the fabric, but referring to the way that we're working it, I start with my carriage on the right. I could have knitted a background color of white to the left, then taken the carriage off, moved it back to the right, changed to ribbon color, changed my settings so that I was selecting 4, 5, and 6, and knitted 1 row. Usually we want to go back and forth because it's so complicated and easy to get confused if you try to knit a single row and you end up with your yarn tails on the wrong sides from where you want them. But since this is the very last of the design, it really wouldn't have mattered. And once I had knitted both colors in the 3rd of the rows, I could have just changed to white and we would have been fine. Now, since I've thoroughly confused you, I'm going to be a good girl and make up for it. Let's knit the final 2 rows on the chart again, doing what I just described. First, we'll knit the one that's second to top, background 1 and 2, 7 and 8, part buttons, select, now we will change to the selection for the ribbon. One, 2. Okay, that's setting us up to do this final row in which the background color should be 1, 2, 3, 7, and 8. One row, not 2 rows. And I will just leave the yarn attached because I want it later. I'm going to take the carriage all the way off to avoid disturbing any stitches, just to be on the safe side. We should depress buttons 4, 5, and 6. Ratchet, knit 1 row. Now I'm done. I'm going to remove the contrast color, the ribbon color. Put the white back in. Oops, almost messed up. And we resume knitting background. Let's get this off and see how I did. Better. Now compare the top 3 rows here with the top 4 rows here, and you'll see that this does create a bit more of a bump, and this looks a little bit more curved. So that might be a refinement to build into our ribbon, is to do the final row on the chart only one time across with each color.